Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I am sitting down and sharing with you how my experience has gone with the first custom palette I made here with my single shadows since depotting them all in January. So if you missed it on my channel or if you're new here, first of all, welcome, hi. I depotted almost all of my eyeshadow palettes into a single eyeshadow collection in January of this year. So I will link that down below and in the corner if you're curious. But I then, for the first time a few weeks ago, put together this custom palette. It's got sort of a weird origin story in the sense that I wasn't really going for like a color story here. I was going for some practicality for a couple of trips that I went on. Now that I've done those trips and also just sort of used this palette, I didn't only use it traveling, I also used it in between the trips as well. I wanted to share some takeaways, do a quick eye look with you here with the palette, and share some swatches of some other color stories that I was really drawn to throughout the time using this product. So I will have a bunch of stuff linked down below in the description box, including the rest of the makeup on my face. The whole look for this is coming next week. It's a full face of favorites over the last like 2 months. So my kind of January, February favorites. So that video will be coming next week if you are interested, but I will list what's on my face down below in case you're curious now. And then I will also make sure to link out to the video where I put together this little travel palette and the depotting video for you too. So we are going to go in this order. I'm going to quickly share a little bit of footage from when I created this palette, just showing you the full color story swatched out. Again, keeping in mind, I was really just going for more of like a romantic feeling here. There wasn't any particular color story that I was trying to build. It was just thinking through practically what I would want or need while traveling. And now that you've seen that, I want to share a couple quick hand swatches that I did today that represent some of the eyeshadow looks that I've been doing most often with this palette. So I'm only showing you one today, the look that's on my eyes, and we will get to that here in a little bit. But next up, I really just want to show you kind of where my mind went with this palette because it was in a very different direction than I expected. The first set of swatches you're going to see here are actually the swatches for the look on my eyes today. I did use every single matte shade that I have in the palette today, and then I used one of the shimmers as well. So I will loop back around to those swatches when the time comes to show you this eye look, and I'll tell you what each of those swatches actually are. This next look that I did sort of caught me by surprise. I was super drawn to use this dark maroon shade in the corner here. This is from the KKW Beauty Classic Blossom palette. I don't know the shade name. That palette's not sold anymore, but it's just a really beautiful, like warm toned berry shade, and I was super drawn to use that. I used it as an eyeliner multiple times, but I did one look in particular that stood out to me where I really built it up in the outer corner to like its full depth. And then I used this shade here from ColourPop. It's the shade Shaken from the Lust for Dusk palette. It's one of my all-time favorite eyeshadows, and you'll see why in those swatches. I used that all over my lids, and I overlapped it almost all the way to the edge of that berry matte shade. So you can see in the swatches I'm showing here that that shimmer, I kind of put some of it just on my bare hand so you could see what it looks like on my bare lid. But then I also overlapped it a little into that matte so that you could see it has just enough translucency or transparency to the base that you can see that nice deep purple behind. I did that look a few times and I was blown away by how beautiful I felt in that eye look. It was a lot, don't get me wrong. I don't typically go that dark and deep and saturated on my outer corners, but I really loved how it turned out. So I actually ended up with that look a couple of times. And then I'm going to show you one more set here of hand swatches. And these two swatches are going to really represent the two single shadow looks that I did, honestly, a couple of times with this palette. On the left side in this little clip is the shade, oh gosh, I've got to look at it again. Yeah, Palladium from the Pat McGrath Celestial Odyssey palette. So in my little palette, it's this one up here. I was feeling a little uncertain about including this in the palette just because it doesn't really go with anything else. But then I realized that was actually awesome for me. I needed sort of just like a one shadow grounded look, and this one gave it to me. I wish it had just a little bit more base pigment that I could sheer out around the edges to blend it out. I occasionally felt like it got a little patchy around the sides when typically I would just put it on my eyelid and then kind of blend and buff the edges so that it fades a little more seamlessly into my skin. I do that a lot with tons of my eyeshadows about this depth and this tone. Don't usually have an issue. This one, I really love the finished look, but it did take me a little bit more work of blending to get there. But that was my most used single shadow look out of this palette by far. Just kind of using that all over the lids, really nice and dimensional, really gorgeous. The other swatch, and I'll pop the little video back up here for you, on the right hand side, it's hard to see because it's pretty similar to my sort of skin tone, but it's actually this blush. I put the blush in here for like practicality's sake for travel, but this is the shade 6 from the Ofra and Samantha March collab. Really stunning. You can see it's not a flat matte blush. It definitely has a little bit of shimmer and shine in there, and it was a really gorgeous shade just for all over my lids. Super simple. Particularly when I was traveling, you know, this was the blush I was using. I only packed one blush on both of my trips, and so it gave a really beautiful monochromatic vibe. Really simple, really straightforward, gorgeous for blush draping, and it's just that perfect like mid-tone for me. It's not too light, not too dark. It adds enough definition and contrast with, you know, like my brow bone, but it doesn't look so dark that my eyes look like sunken in, which sometimes happens for me because I do have deep set eyes naturally. So those were my two most common sort of single shadow looks, so to speak, were to use that blush as an eyeshadow and the Pat McGrath shade in here. So you'll maybe notice conspicuously that with the exception of the look today that I'm about to talk you through, I actually didn't use this matte right here tons, and I didn't use this shimmer shade a ton either. I probably could have gotten away with honestly just not having them. I did use this light shade quite a bit with honestly most of these looks just to kind of like blend the edges, right? Particularly in the look with this like deeper burgundy shade. It's nice just to have something to kind of like ease the transition between that and my relatively light skin tone. So it was sort of like a cleanup shade for me. But these two shades I probably didn't even need to bring, honestly. And in hindsight, this matte and this blush kind of served the same purpose for me in a lot of ways. And so it probably wasn't necessary, but I like that I had the option. It did help me a little bit. And this matte is the shade Shell Ya from the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette. And it's something I lean on really heavily in a lot of my eye looks, not just with this palette, but you know, I've always sought it out as like one of my most used matte shades. So I was glad to have it with me for those times when I did want that, but honestly, it's not what I reached for most often, which is really surprising to me. All right, so looping back around to that first set of hand swatches that you saw that represent the look today, I'm going to talk you through the shades first here, and then I will talk you through the technique, and you'll see me applying this as I talk through. So the shades I have swatched in order here are this light pink shade here. This is also from the KKW Beauty Classic Blossom palette. Do not know the name of the shade. Palette isn't sold anymore. So that's the first swatch in the lineup. Then I swatched this shimmer shade here. Let me get the name of this. I can't remember. It's the shade Awaken, and it is from the Ethereal palette by Profusion Cosmetics. It's a really gorgeous like iridescent gold. Super stunning. Then I did swatch Shell Ya from ColourPop Going Coconuts. And then the last swatch you see is actually this matte brown and this berry shade combined. So kind of mixed together, swatched together. So already talked about the berry shade here, KKW Beauty Classic Blossom palette, not sold anymore. And then this is the shade Hot Chocolate from Sydney Grace. Really gorgeous. It's like my deepest, warmest, richest brown in my collection, and it was a perfect complement to the berry shade to kind of still lend a little bit of that pinky tone, but tone it down just a little bit to be a little more neutral. So those are the shades we're working with here. So first things first, I went into that really, really light pink shade and I put it across like the first, I'd say 3/4 of my eyelid. I just put it down with kind of a flat brush. Didn't need a super, super opaque layer, like I said, because I already had kind of blanked out my lids, but I like the brightness that this shadow brings to my lids. I think it's just, you know, it's like that 1 or 2 shades lighter and 1 or 2 shades like more pink toned than my natural skin tone. So I really, really love the look of that sort of as a base for an all matte look. I do have a tiny bit of shimmer on today as we'll talk about, but mostly this is a matte look. So then I went into Shell Yeah and I blended that on my outer corners and about to the midway point of my crease. So just kind of trying to get a really nice diffused blend there, adding a little bit of definition here, building my way up because I'm about to use that very dark shade, but I don't want that dark shade to stick too tightly to my lid. I don't want it to adhere too much to my lid because I want to be able to buff and blend it. So this kind of intermediary shade is really, really nice to kind of just get that soft blend. So then I did go into that combination, kind of bouncing back and forth between the berry tone and the dark chocolate brown shade from Sydney Grace, and picked up basically like a very slightly berry leaning brown matte. And I put that on my outer corners, but rather than doing it in like a circular motion like I did with Shell Yeah, I kind of did it in slightly more of like about the middle of my lid out, almost like I was doing a winged liner. So a lot more diffused than that, a lot less defined than that, but in that sort of a shape, just to kind of lift my eyes and add some depth out there without adding like a pinpoint of depth. I wanted it to be more of like a gradual transition between the other matte shades I already had on my lid. So I did that, and then I just did a little bit of blending in the middle to kind of make sure it's a good transition. And then last but not least, I felt like I was missing just a little something. So I did throw that shimmer shade on my inner corners on just a really quick light layer. I love an all matte look with like a shimmer inner corner or like a shimmer across my whole lid with a matte inner corner. I love the contrast of that sort of a look. And so love that this palette gave me the opportunity to play with that. So that's the look I decided to share with you all today. I've done sort of a variation on this theme multiple times while using this palette. Sometimes it's less intricate. A lot of times I stop after Shell Yeah. I don't kind of go in with that deeper layer. I just kind of do the light pink on my lids and then Shell Yeah in the outer corners, but I was feeling like I wanted something a little smokier today. So I am sadly now going to disassemble this. I'm going to go ahead and put these back into my big single shadow collection, my like big palette that holds all of them. I will probably do another kind of curating another custom color palette here soon on my channel. It might be a little while. I kind of want to give it a rest. I kind of want to, I've been longing for a couple of my eyeshadow palettes, like the pre-curated ones from brands that I did not depot. So I've sort of been, in particular, really, really looking forward to using the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde this spring. And it's just like calling to me. So I'm going to stick with that for a while here, at least for a little bit, and kind of see where I go from there. But I will do this again. I promise I will do this again in the sense that I will kind of take you through the process of selecting the eyeshadows, kind of creating eye looks or telling you how I've used the palette. It's really important to me that I'm actually using the makeup I own. And so decluttering or depotting, excuse me, all of my, or not all, but a lot of my palettes into single shadows, I think is really gonna open up my mind and let me use these shadows way more than I have been historically. And so I do want to keep up that creativity. So let me know if there's anything in particular you'd like to see, like any specific color story. I've been thinking about duping the vibes of a couple palettes that I'm really, really drawn to, or that I've almost bought, you know, things that I'm like, I really want this palette, and I see how close I could get, right? So tell me if you have any specific requests or ideas or things you'd really love to see me do with the single shadow collection. It's obviously a very new part of my makeup life here, and so any inspiration that you all have for me, I would really appreciate. I hope this was an interesting video for you to kind of just have me come back and reflect on how this went for the first time I've ever done this. And I know it was a really good learning experience for me. So thank you all so much for watching today, and I will see you next time.